Welcome to the report about cats. I'm going to talk about cats today. Just cats. Did you guys see this? China carries dead American body parts. Chinese tanker had a container full of dead Americans. We're going to go to this. Chinese tanker had a container full of dead Americans. Right here, this picture is a maximilia of human remains from Mizlaya Cave in Israel, the oldest remains of our species, Homo sapiens, found outside Africa, is shown in this handout photo. Released January 25, 2018, courtesy Israel, Tel Aviv. What am I looking at? Exporting companies are using Chinese ships, planes, and trucks to transport dead Americans across the world for research purposes, according to a Thursday report from Reuters. A Hong Kong-flagged cargo ship departed South Carolina in July, carrying 6,000 pounds of human remains valued at $67,204. The container's temperature was set to 5 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent the parts from spoiling. Relatives of the dead, meanwhile, did not realize their loved ones' remains were being dismembered and sent to Europe and elsewhere, the report notes. We'll read that report. Body brokers like organ-based Medcure rely on lax regulations to export heads, shoulders, knees, and toes to Mexico, China, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia, among several other countries. Plastic surgeons in Germany use heads to practice new techniques, while thousands of parts are shipped overseas annually. Quote, there are people who wouldn't necessarily mind where the specimens were sent if they were fully informed. Brandy Schmidt, who directs a body donation system at the University of California, told reporters about the trade, which is still shrouded in mystery. But clearly, there are plenty of donors that do not mind and that don't feel like they're getting enough information. The FBI raided Medcure in November, which culminated in a federal investigation. Medcure is committed to meeting and exceeding the highest standards in the industry. This is a quote. It takes very serious its obligation to not only deliver safe specimens securely, but do it in a way that respects the donors, said the company's lawyer, Jeffrey Edelson, who declined to comment of the nature of the raid. Families of those on in the ships were shocked to hear that their husbands, fathers, and daughters were shipped overseas. Marie Gallegos, whose husband's head was shipped to a dental school in Israel months after he died of a heart attack, told reporters that she should have read the fine print of the forms she signed allowing his parts to be donated for science and research. Hi, Lavona. Threw me off there. Says, this is a quote, had I known that my husband's head was over there, I would have waited to have the ceremony, she said. If they really wanted my husband's body for these purposes, they should have told me up front and verbally. Regulators are also concerned the parts might be infected with HIV or some other highly infectious disease. There is a disconnect between what the industry and the government believe is dangerous, Matthew Zahn, chairman of the Public Health Committee for the Infectious Diseases Society of America, told reporters. It's a situation where we don't have a huge amount of regulation or clarity as to what the risks are, Zahn said. It feels like one of those cracks in the system where a practice has developed and the risk factors and oversight have not fully matured. Current regulations cover body parts intended for transplant, such as hearts and livers, which have allowed some unsavory elements of the industry to bubble to the top. FBI investigators raided the warehouse of another so-called body broker last year and found a grisly discovery. Court papers reveal the building, owned and operated by businessman Arthur Rathburn, I did a story on this, was littered with dead flies, dog bowels, and human remains frozen together in huge chunks. Yeah, and he also had storage units of like baby fetuses and heads and all kinds of stuff. Rathburn's business, International Biological Incorporation, or IBI, became a target after routine border stops found he was ferrying human heads to Mexico on their way to forlorn parts of the globe, court records show. The jury ultimately found Rathburn guilty of fraud for supplying his customers with body parts infected with HIV and hepatitis. The fraud scheme, orchestrated by IBI, shocked even the most experienced of our investigative team. FBI Special Agent in Charge David Gelios told reporters, donors were victimized as IBI intentionally and recklessly marketed and transported contaminated human remains. Personal greed overcame decency, he said in a statement after the verdict. Let's go to this. Let's go to that report. So this is the original one that was put out in Reuters. All right, cashing in on the donated dead, the body trade. Made in America, U.S. body brokers supply the world with human torsos, limbs, and heads. Part 9. Body parts from American donors have been exported to at least 45 countries and thousands of parts are sent abroad annually. Demand is high in nations where customs limit selling or dissecting their own dead. In the U.S., though, almost anything goes. So, a U.S. body donation company leased the heads of dead Americans to a Tel Aviv dental training facility. The facility posted pictures of the training on Facebook in October, just before returning a shipment of heads to the United States. That shipment was intercepted by U.S. border agents because the manifest mislabeled the package of heads as electronics. Portland, Oregon. On July 20, a Hong Kong flag cargo ship departed Charleston, South Carolina, carrying thousands of containers. One of them held a lucrative commodity, body parts from dozens of dead Americans. According to the manifest, the shipment bound for Europe included about 6,000 pounds of human remains, valued at $67,204. To keep the merchandise from spoiling, the temperature was set at 5 degrees. The body parts came from a Portland business called MedCure, Inc., a so-called body broker. MedCure profits by dissecting the bodies of altruistic donors and sending the parts to medical training and research companies. MedCure sells or leases about 10,000 body parts from U.S. donors annually, shipping about 20% of them overseas. Internal corporate and manifest records show. In addition to bulk cargo shipments to the Netherlands, where MedCure operates a distribution hub, the Oregon company has exported body parts to at least 22 other countries by plane or truck, the records show. Among the parts, a pelvis and legs. Among the parts, a pelvis and legs to a university in Malaysia, feet to a medical device companies in Brazil and Turkey, and heads to hospitals in Slovenia and the United Arab Emirates. Demand for body parts from America, torsos, knees, and heads, is high in countries where religious traditions or laws prohibit the dissection of the dead. Unlike many developed nations, the United States largely does not regulate the sale of donated body parts, allowing entrepreneurs such as MedCure to expand exports rapidly during the last decade. No other nation has an industry that can provide as convenient and reliable a supply of body parts. Since 2008, Reuters found U.S. body brokers have exported parts of at least 45 countries: Italy, Israel, Mexico, China, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia are some of those included. Whole bodies are studied at Caribbean-based medical schools. Plastic surgeons in Germany use heads from dead Americans to practice new techniques. Thousands of parts are shipped overseas annually. A precise number cannot be calculated because no agency tracks industry exports. Most donor consent forms, including those from Medcure, authorize brokers to dissect bodies and ship parts internationally. Even so, some relatives of the dead said they did not realize that the remains of a loved one might be dismembered and sent to the far reaches of the globe. There are people who wouldn't necessarily mind where the specimens were sent if they were fully informed, said Brandy Schmidt, who directs the University of California System's Atomical Donation Program. But clearly, there are plenty of donors that do mind and that don't feel like they're getting enough information. That's why you got to watch it with the donations card on the ID. Watch it. I heard a lot of sketchy stuff where they get the lists of people that donate from the ID, and you might get a bullet to the head, and or some sort of something happen, and then all of a sudden your heart's shipped off for somebody that has a matching blood type. I'm just saying. Medcure shipments are now the subject of a federal investigation. In November, the Federal Bureau, FBI, raided the company's Portland headquarters. Though the search warrant remains sealed, people familiar with the matter say it relates in parts to overseas shipping. Medcure is cooperating with the investigation, said its lawyer, Jeffrey Edelson. He declined to comment on the FBI raid, but said Medcure is committed to blah, blah, blah. Safety and this and that. Edelson also said Medcure partners with government and industry agencies to follow and exceed requirements for shipping human tissue, and that shipping handlers, drivers, and carriers are specifically trained for the safe handling and transportation of human specimens. Oh, thank you for your lawyer talk. I always wonder when I see all these ships in Long Beach, just what is lurking in those ships. What is lurking in those ships? Let's go ahead and steal that image. Precious cargo. The OOCL Europe left July 20 from South Carolina for the Netherlands, carrying a refrigerated container filled with human body parts. Here it is docked at the port of Newark in New Jersey in November after it delivered the parts to Europe. Dun, dun, dun. I mean, that is scary, right? All right. Infected parts at the border. As a Reuters series last year revealed, the body donation industry is so lightly regulated in the U.S. that almost anyone can legally buy, sell, or lease body parts. Lease? Like a car? I'm going to lease a head? What are you talking about? Although no federal law expressly regulates the body trade, there is one situation in which a U.S. government does exercise oversight when body parts leave or enter the country. Border agents have the authority to ensure that the parts are not infected with contagious diseases and are properly shipped. Oh, well, thanks. I'm glad that we at least care if biohazard is being transported for money, makes me feel a little bit safe. Not really. This authority played a leading role in the government securing a conviction last month of a Detroit broker, Arthur Rathburn, who stored body parts in his grisly, unsanitary condition grisly unsanitary conditions, according to trial testimony. The FBI began to focus intently on repeated border stops in which he was found ferrying human heads, court records show. The jury found Rathburn defrauded customers by supplying body parts infected with HIV and hepatitis. The fraud scheme, orchestrated by the IBI, shocked even the most experienced of our investigative team. Even in the death, Gellio said in the statement after the verdict, donors were victimized as IBI intentionally and recklessly marketed and transported contaminated human remains. Personal greed overcame decency. Steve Gore, far left, Phoenix body broker who pleaded guilty to defrauding customers. So far left. So the one with the back turned, or what? What do you mean? He testified against Detroit broker Arthur Rathburn, foreground. So this is Arthur right here. So this guy is a body broker testifying against this body broker. Sweet, hot, sweet. And that's what the FBI does. They just get involved in just criminals. And they turn one criminal against another criminal. Rathburn was also convicted of transporting hazardous materials. The head of someone who died of a bacterial sepsis and aspiration pneumonia. Oh, sweet. Sweet. So they died of bacterial sepsis, which is no joke. I got that when I was shot, and I had to be in the hospital forever. The transportation conviction underscored the U.S. government's growing, and it was actually worse than the freaking bullet wound. 2 bullet wounds. The transportation conviction underscored the U.S. government's growing concern about shipments of body parts that might endanger public health, officials said. Martin Cetron, Director of Global Migration and Quarantine for the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, said that when brokers dissect a body that is infected, there is added risk of transferring that disease to anyone who handles the parts. In the case of saws used to cut bones and limbs, there may be additional procedures that could potentially turn a fluid into an aerosol that could be inhaled and be communicable. Reuters' review of governmental records show that border agents intercepted body parts suspected to be infected at least 75 times between 2008 and 2017. 9 years. Border agents pay more attention to goods entering the country than those departing, and virtually all of the intercepted shipments were remains of American donors whose body parts were being returned to the United States. Typically, body parts are returned to America for 3 reasons: to comply with foreign laws on final disposition, when cremation is not available in the foreign country, or when a U.S. broker intends to reuse the parts. Oh my. 2016-17, for example, federal agents stopped shipments being returned to Medcure at the border, law enforcement records show. The body parts they stopped include torsos carrying infectious biological agents that cause sepsis, a body's extreme response to infection. At least one carried the life-threatening MRSA bacteria. Oh, man. For more than a year, records show U.S. officials and some body brokers have disagreed over whether the presence of sepsis in a corpse without further information about a person's cause of death poses enough risk to warrant special packaging and warning labels. You gotta be kidding. Sepsis itself is not a disease diagnosis, but it raises a red flag, said Cetron, the CDC official. The pathogen that caused sepsis, he said, could be a bacteria, could be Ebola, could be Salmonella, could be E. coli. That's why further documentation, including a death certificate, must accompany any body part imported into the U.S. CDC has an exemption intended to allow for shipping blood and other lab testing samples. Reuters found dozens of examples of brokers labeling customers' manifests and packages with a version of the term exempt human specimen to ship body parts. I think that's a descriptive practice, or deceptive. If they are human remains, part or in whole, heads, arms, limbs, etc., they are not exempted. Several brokers said the government should clarify the rules, whether the CDC's or those of another regulatory entities. They cited, for example, a U.S. Department of Transportation regulation that they believe exempt body parts. Transportation officials declined to comment on the regulations. How do you get involved with this? Can't you find something else to do that's a little bit more... I mean, you got to do this for a living. You know what I mean? I'm not talking about doctors and things, but I mean, you're just a body transporter? That would suck. Talk about just ruining your life. I mean, I don't know. You know, wouldn't you want to spend your time? Time is the most precious thing, not money. Allison Harrison, executive director of an Oklahoma-based broker, United Tissue Network, said most of her industry want to follow the law. But she added there are many guidelines that are unclear and are contradictory to other departments' regulations. The disconnect between what the industry and government believe is dangerous and what the precautions required by law should be resolved. Blah, blah, blah. America, a group of representatives, researchers, and blah, blah, blah. A situation where we don't have a huge amount of regulation or clarity as to what the risks are, Zahn said, it feels like one of those cracks in the system where the practice has developed and it's bubbled to the top, blah, blah, blah. Exporting Americans, Medcure, founded in 2005, describes itself, as do most body brokers, as a non-transplant tissue bank. It has distribution hubs and surgical training centers near Portland, Oregon, Las Vegas, Providence, Rhode Island. The company also has distribution hubs near Orlando and St. Louis. When Medcure donors die, the cadavers are transported to one of these hubs. According to former employees, Medcure deploys a temperature-controlled truck to carry body parts between 5 of the facilities. Look at that building. Looks all nice. Oh, got a heart. Nice, neat lawn and everything. Nice and clean. Gets raided by the FBI. Medcure began shipping cadavers and body parts overseas as individual orders one by one, largely by airplane. The former employee said the company later calculated that it could increase profits by shipping bulk quantities of body parts to Europe and distributing them from there. 2012, Medcure opened its European hub in Amsterdam. Since then, Medcure has sent to the Netherlands at least 6 refrigerated cargo containers filled with frozen human remains, manifest records show. The first container, 40 feet long, 8 feet wide, 9.5 feet tall, departed the port of Tacoma in Washington State in July 2012. The body parts weighed about 5,000 pounds, valued at $250,000. Wow, 5,000 pounds of all frozen together, just parts. Medcure continued to export via truck and plane as well. For example, shoulders to a hospital in Mexico, knees to a surgical training center in Taiwan, and a head to a university in Chile. The shipments are detailed in internal Medcure documents and in data from 2 companies that collect trade manifests. Descartes Datamine of Ontario, Canada, and Peers, a unit of IHS. IHS, that's like Illuminati stuff right there, IHS. Market, Maritime, and Trade, based in London. IHS. Suspect. I'm out of here.